We've now got our minimum amount of configuration put together for our Google strategy. As a first argument, we passed in some configuration options, and then as a second argument, we placed an arrow function that is a callback, and we're not really too worried about what this is doing just yet, but we will talk about it in just a little bit. Now, we've basically got enough configuration put together here to test out our authentication flow. So in this section, we're going to do one last little small change, and then we're going to start to test out the full authentication flow. Now, before we do that, I want to review our flow here very quickly. Remember that we had said that whenever a user clicks our login button, they are going to be directed to our server /auth/Google. Our application will then forward them on to Google servers, and after the user grants permission to our application, they will be kicked back to our server, specifically to the route of localhost :5000 /auth/Google/callback. So the last thing we have to do to test this flow out is make sure that we put together some configuration to say, hey, whenever a user goes to /auth/Google, we should then start the entire OAuth process being managed by Passport. So that's the last little piece we have to put together. Remember how we had said that we use Express to do different things based on what route a user visits. We put together a route handler. And so that's exactly what we're going to do right now. We're going to put together a little route handler inside of our application that makes sure that a user gets kicked into this Passport flow. All right, so I'm going to change back over to my index.js file, and then directly underneath the Passport.use statement, we're going to add a single route handler. Now remember, we had spoken about route handlers previously. We had said we reference the Express app object. We state the type of or method of the request that we want to handle here. And so in this case, we want to handle a GET type HTTP request. Then the first argument is the path that we want to handle, which in this case is /auth/Google. And then the second argument is some code to be executed whenever a request comes in to this route with this request type. Now, in the past, on the previous example we put an arrow function in here that was executed whenever a user came to this route. But this time around, as a second argument, we're going to tell Express to involve Passport and basically pass the user off to Passport, where they will then be kicked into this authentication flow. So as a second argument, we're going to say Passport.authenticate. We're going to give it a first argument of Google as a string, and then a second argument that's going to be an object. It's going to have a property scope, and we'll talk about what this is in just a second. And that will be an array with profile and email, like so. Okay, so let's save this, and then we're going to talk about what's going on here. So again, whenever a user comes to this route, we want to kick them into our OAuth flow, which is being entirely managed by Passport. So we are saying, hey, Passport, attempt to authenticate the user who is coming in on this route and use the strategy called Google. Now, one quick thing that is very confusing with Google, with Passport, and remember, this is one of the other complaints I had about Google, is that some of the configuration you do, it's kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? This is kind of weird. So I want to specifically point at this string right here of Google. So when you read Google, you might think, okay, yeah, that makes sense. We want to authenticate the user with Google. We want to use Google OAuth. However, if you look back up at all this configuration that we did right here, we had never explicitly said, hey, here is this Google strategy, and it is called like the string Google. In other words, we never specifically registered this strategy with Passport and called it with a string of Google like so. We never set up this little identifier right here. So here's what's going on. Internally, Google strategy has some little bit of code that says, I am known as a strategy called Google, like the string Google. So hey, Passport, when you load me up, if anyone attempts to authenticate and say authenticate with the string of Google, use me. Use this strategy right here, okay? So again, the Google strategy has an internal identifier of Google, and that's how Passport knows to take this string right here and go and find this strategy that has been already wired up to it. Okay, so that's the first argument. Now the second argument is an options object, and we passed in scope right here. The scope specifies to Google, like the actual Google servers, what access we want to have inside of this user's profile. So in other words, we are asking Google to give us access to this user's profile information and their email address as well. These two strings that I passed in here are not randomly made up. So Google internally has a list of all the different scopes or permissions that we can ask for from a user's account. So we could also ask for, say, the ability to read a user's contact list, or read all the images inside of their Google Drive account, or read all of their emails. Those are different scopes that we can ask for inside of the OAuth process. In this case, we are just getting access to the profile and the email. I don't really care about any of these for our application. Like, they don't really make a difference for our application. I just want to give you an example of how we can ask for very specific pieces of a user's account. Okay, so I think that we're now ready to test this out inside the browser. We have set up our route handler. We've said that whenever someone visits the route, auth/Google, they should be directed into the Passport authentication flow. So I want to now test this out. I'm going to tell you right now that when we test this, we're going to get a very small error, and that's totally okay. It's because I want to draw like very specific attention to this one aspect of authentication, or OAuth in general. Okay, so we're going to get an error, but that's totally okay. We're going to fix it up very quickly. So let's first make sure that our server is running. To do so, we'll change back over to our terminal. I'm still inside my server directory, and I'll start up the server with node index.js. And that's going to start the server up. Then I'm going to open up a new browser tab, and remember to get /Google on our server, which is running on localhost :5000. So we're going to say localhost :5000 /auth/Google. Now when we go there, Express is going to see that we are making a request to auth/Google. It's going to access that route handler that we just put together, and it's going to direct our request into this big old Passport flow. So let's get to it. Let's see what happens. So I'll hit enter. And as you can see, we successfully got redirected over to Google. So like something good happened here. Like we are clearly at Google. We are doing something with OAuth. But very quickly, you notice that we've got a nice big error message on the screen with an error that says redirect URI mismatch. And so this is a very important error to see right here, because this is something that you're very likely to see whenever you are setting up OAuth for yourself. And it also will give you a little bit more insight into what is going on under the hood with OAuth. So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to fix up this error message and then test out our application again.